When you look at the business world, we often talk about entrepreneurs, founders, and, CEOs. But what about the company itself? We treat them like they're a single thing. They sign contracts, they take on debt, they even get fined. We're surrounded by them. But what actually makes a business a separate thing from the people running it?
It's a fantastic question.
Because when a business incorporates, something really strange happens. A kind of legal fiction is created. A stack of paperwork becomes a person in the eyes of the law.
It does.
So today we're doing a deep dive into the very foundations of corporate law. Our mission is to unpack this core idea of separate legal personality, define the powerful concept of the corporate veil, and crucially, figure out its limits. When does that legal shield just fail?
And this is, it's indispensable knowledge for understanding the architecture of modern commerce.
Yeah.
This isn't just dry legal theory. It is the foundation that dictates liability, risk, and even investment strategy across the entire world. Understanding why a company is treated as its own person is, well, it's key to figuring out how financial risk works.
Okay, so let's start right there with that bedrock concept, the idea that separates the company from its founder. What is the technical mechanism that lets a corporation stand on its own 2 feet?
That is what we call the principle of separate legal personality. It is the absolute cornerstone of how businesses are formed and regulated today.
Okay.
In simple terms, once a company goes through the whole incorporation process, it gets an independent, autonomous legal status. It's not just a collection of people anymore. It's its own entity.
An independent entity. And what can it do exactly? What are the immediate consequences of this sort of legal baptism?
Well, the implications are huge. Because the company is its own legal person, it can operate entirely in its own name. It can own property, buildings, equipment, patents, and that property belongs to the company.
Not the shareholders.
Not the shareholders. It enters into contracts. It takes on debt, all of it completely separate from its founders. It can even, sue or be sued, again, separate from the actual people involved.
That feels revolutionary, especially when you think about how early businesses worked.
Yeah.
This idea must have had a definitive starting point, right? There must have been some landmark legal battle that cemented this separation.
Oh, there was. And it's arguably the most important case in corporate history, Salomon v. Salomon & Co. Ltd. It's a British case from the late 19th century, but it established the principle so firmly that it's still foundational everywhere.
Salomon versus Salomon. It sounds like the guy was basically arguing with himself. What were the facts of that case?
He was, in a way, and that's what makes it such a perfect example. So Mr. Aaron Salomon was a boot manufacturer. He was operating as a sole trader.
Okay.
He decides to incorporate, so he sells his successful business to a new company he just formed, Salomon & Co. Ltd. In exchange, he gets cash, shares in the new company, and a big chunk of debentures, which are basically secured loans.
So he's both the owner and the main creditor.
Exactly. He owned almost all the shares. His family had a few just to meet the requirements. But then the company hits financial trouble, and it fails. The unsecured creditors, the people who loaned money without any security, they argued that the company was just a sham.
Right, that it was just a front for Mr. Salomon himself.
Precisely. They said, therefore, he should be personally liable to pay the company's debts.
So they were trying to say, look, we know this is just one guy trying to protect his assets. Ignore the paperwork. What did the court decide?
The highest court, the House of Lords at the time, ruled decisively in Mr. Salomon's favor. They said, and this is the key part, that once a company is legally incorporated, it is, and I quote, at law, a different person altogether from the subscribers.
Wow.
The founders' motives didn't matter. The company was a separate legal person, and so its debts were its debts. And Mr. Salomon, because he held those secured loans, was actually entitled to get his money back before the unsecured creditors got anything.
That is a huge shift. So the takeaway for you, the listener, is that this wasn't some minor ruling. This single case, Salomon v. Salomon, created the legal template that allows for all the sophisticated risk management we see today.
It did. The company is born, and it immediately takes on the risks of the business, shielding the person who created it. This decision really fueled the Industrial Revolution by giving investors the confidence that, the most they could lose was the money they put into the shares, not their personal life savings. It created limited liability.
And that separation, that wall between the company's risk and the owner's private assets, it has a name, a really powerful metaphor. Let's talk about the corporate veil.
Yes. The corporate veil. It's the conceptual barrier that exists as a direct result of that separate legal personality we just talked about from the Salomon case. It's sort of the visible manifestation of that legal distinction.
And its function.
Its function is simple: protection. The veil separates the company's liabilities and assets from those of its owners and shareholders. When you buy a share in a public company, the most you can typically lose is whatever you paid for that share. That's the veil doing its job.
But wait a minute, doesn't that sound like an invitation for abuse? If I can just create a new person to take on my financial risk, why wouldn't I just constantly use that to evade responsibility?
That is the perfect question to ask.
I mean, if a company fails because of, say, terrible management, do the directors really just walk away scot-free every single time?
And that brings us to the crucial limits of this whole structure. The veil is a powerful shield, but it is conditional. The legal system recognizes that without some kind of check, the corporate form could absolutely become a tool for fraud.
Okay, so there is a check.
There is, and this is where we get to the idea of lifting the veil.
The ultimate check on corporate power. So when a court decides to lift the veil, what is actually happening legally? What kind of behavior triggers such a sincere response?
Lifting the veil means the court is choosing to ignore the separate legal personality of the company. It's a judicial move where they basically say, nope, we see this corporate form has been misused and we are going to look directly behind it.
And hold the individuals responsible.
And hold the individuals, the directors, the owners, personally liable for the company's debts or actions.
So that protection just vanishes. And all those personal assets that were supposed to be safe are now exposed.
Yeah.
What does that kind of abuse usually look like in practice?
Well, courts are very, very reluctant to do this. I mean, it goes against the entire principle of Salomon, but there are a few consistent situations where it happens.
Sure.
The first one is when the company is used as a mere facade or a sham. This is when a company is set up for the sole purpose of avoiding an existing legal obligation. Not a future risk, but a current one.
Can you give me an example?
Sure. Say you're a business owner and you've signed a contract that says you won't compete with someone. If you then immediately form a new company, a totally separate one on paper, just to get around that specific contract, a court is going to see right through that.
So it's not about avoiding future business risk, which is legal, but about dodging a responsibility you already have.
Exactly. Another major reason is genuine fraud or improper conduct. If a director is intentionally mixing company money with their personal money, or running the company knowing it can't possibly pay its debts, or using the structure to commit outright theft, the court will just collapse the two personalities and hold the individual liable.
That makes the protection feel a lot less absolute, which is an important point. The veil only holds up if the people behind it respect the separation themselves.
You've got it.
So if I start treating the company bank account like my personal wallet, I'm basically blurring the very line the law created for me.
You are. And the courts see that as you disrespecting the legal fiction they granted you. You have to maintain the formalities, keep clear records, hold meetings, act in the company's name to keep that shield intact. The power is enormous, but it comes with strings attached.
Okay, let's shift focus and make this really practical. We've established how this limited company structure works. But many small businesses don't start that way. So for you, the listener, what is a huge difference between this and something like a sole trader?
It's night and day. It really is, and it fundamentally shows the power of the veil. When you operate as a sole trader, that legal separation, it just doesn't exist. There is no independent entity. The individual who owns the business is the business. They are one and the same.
I can only imagine what that means for liability. It must be terrifyingly different.
Absolutely stark. A sole trader operates with unlimited liability. So if that baker you started takes out a loan and then, the market collapses, the individual running it is personally on the hook for every single penny of business debt.
Every penny.
Every penny. Creditors can legally go after their personal assets, their savings account, their house, their car. Everything is at risk to pay off the business debts.
Whereas with the limited company, because of its separate personality, if the business goes under, the owners typically only lose the money they put into the company itself.
That's the critical distinction. It makes the decision to incorporate not just some bit of paperwork, but a profound risk management choice. And this doesn't even get into things like taxes, where a separate company is often treated very differently from personal income. But that's a whole other deep dive.
Right. So to really crystallize that point for the listener, choosing the company form is about creating a buffer. It's an economic shock absorber that protects the people inside from the risks outside. This autonomy is why global investment even exists on the scale it does today. Without the Salomon principle, every investment would be a potentially crippling personal risk.
It's what allows people to take massive but calculated risks. You're calculating the risk to the company's assets, not to your family's financial security. That is the genius of the limited company.
So we've covered a lot of ground here. We've moved from the birth of the principle in Salomon v. Salomon to the physical manifestation of that protection in the corporate veil, and finally to the really crucial limits, when courts step in because the structure has been misused.
I think the fundamental takeaway is that this separate legal identity is the concept that underpins all risk and liability in commercial law. The veil is there to protect shareholders, but it is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. The court always has the ultimate power to look behind that shield to make sure justice is done.
This whole deep dive just goes to show how profound a single piece of legislation can be. I mean, it literally created a new kind of actor in the global economy. And that legal person status gives these entities enormous power and protection. So here's a final thought for you to mull over. If a company really is a separate legal person with rights and responsibilities independent of its human directors, what specific non-financial duties must the actual people running the company owe to society to ethically justify that powerful legal distinction? It's something worth considering when you look at the immense footprint of these legally autonomous entities in our world today.